Hi, y'all. My name is Nikki Dubois. I am a licensed master social worker in the state of Texas. And today I am going to be sharing a little bit on boundaries, how to set boundaries, and what even are boundaries. Let me share my screen and we will get started. All right, boundaries as self-care. To start, I want to give the definition of boundary. We often hear, I'm going to set boundaries, or I need to work on setting boundaries, and maybe we don't know what boundaries are. So our friend Webster tells us that boundaries are something that indicates or fixes a limit or extent. So in what we're going to be talking about, boundaries are going to be a limit that we are putting on the emotional energy that we're putting out to others. It's going to be a limit on the physical properties that we give others. It's going to be our limits that we use to protect our own mental health, to protect our own emotional health, and to protect our physical safety as well. I talk about boundaries being a form of self-care that is often overlooked. When we hear self-care that's being marketed to us, we often think of self-care being the more luxurious types, so getting our nails done, getting our hair done, maybe getting a massage, taking a bath. Those are wonderful forms of self-care, and they're not the only forms of self-care. So we will be talking about boundaries as a way of self-care that's often overlooked. Doing laundry, paying bills on time, house cleaning, those are also forms of self-care. So why even set boundaries? Poor to no boundaries can lead to resentments. It can lead to conflicts. It can lead to exhaustion. If we are giving too much of ourselves and we are not giving ourselves rest or setting limits, you can see how we could easily get exhausted and even burn out. So we are maybe feeling like we don't want to go to work, maybe we don't want to engage in this friendship anymore, maybe we're feeling resentful. That can be due to not having firm boundaries. Physical and emotional safety, loss of identity, dissatisfaction, and not getting our needs met. And I have a few memes throughout this presentation. I love memes. And so this one is titled or labeled an actual photo of my first attempt at setting boundaries. That is a deadbolt, and instead of the locking mechanism, there is a Cheeto in its place. These are the types of boundaries that we will be discussing throughout the presentation. Rigid boundaries, these boundaries are impenetrable, non-negotiable, black and white. The imagery that I'm providing you is an example of a brick wall, right? It's not being moved, it is there, and it is not letting anybody through. An example that I give as a rigid boundary is for consent. So we want to be able to say yes or no to touch, to anything that might be leading to sexual interactions. And out of these three boundaries, it's okay to have rigid, right? We often think of rigid as being something that we might not want, and an example of consent. And if there are other boundaries in your life that you might want to have a non-negotiable stance on. Flexible is where we tend to want to land for a lot of our other boundaries. We want there to be a boundary, and we want it to be firm if we so desire. We want it to be able to fluctuate given the needs, given our needs, given our desire for space and growth, and allowing us to be able to sit with some discomfort as we grow. An example can be if you work in a 9-to-5 job, being able to leave early, so not having that rigid boundary that I have to be there at 9, I have to leave there at 5, being able to decide I want to leave a little bit early to meet a social or family obligation, and maybe I come in early the next day. Of course, this depends on your work environment. Or another example of a flexible boundary can be the compromises and negotiations that we make in a relationship. And the example is of a chain link fence. So the fence is there, it is keeping things out, and it is not completely solid, so it can allow for things to come through. The next boundary is permeable. So this boundary lacks clear definition, and it is a boundary that might collapse at the slightest pushback, or it's a boundary that maybe we have assumed that others know that we have set and we haven't set it and we don't maintain it. So it's hard to tell, but the sign on that fence says, please keep gate closed, which is a permeable boundary, right? Because the gate is not connected to a fence and you can just walk around that boundary. The next couple of slides are going to go over different areas of boundaries so that we can set. And while we're going through this, what I'd like for you to consider is your own life, and if this is an area of your life that you have rigid boundaries, if you have flexible or if you have permeable, and also considering how we interact with other people's boundaries as we are going through this presentation. So not only do we set boundaries for ourselves and for others, and we also have others around us that are also setting their own boundaries. And so we are negotiating our own boundaries and other people's boundaries as we interact throughout the world. So the boundary we're going to be talking about, or all of them, is an emotional boundary. So these are not just about how we want to feel and how others want to feel. These boundaries are even more about demonstrating our respect for our relationships with ourselves and our others. It is about allowing others to have their own emotions and allowing ourselves to have our own emotions. So not taking ownership of other people's experiences and not caretaking for them in a way that we don't allow ourselves to have the full emotional experience. And it's, again, not about taking responsibility for how people respond to their emotions. Mental boundaries, these are around our thoughts, beliefs, and ideas and how they are respected. They're also about our access to information, ideas, and opportunities to learn. These boundaries are separate from emotional boundaries because someone can be emotionally kind but not respect your worldview. Physical boundaries, these are the boundaries that deal with touch. So when, where, how, who, etc. Both of others touching you and you touching others. Material boundaries, these are boundaries that deal with things that we own or lay claim to. So our homes, bikes, favorite t-shirts, and I ask, as we consider material boundaries, that we remain curious and non-judgmental. We can own something and have it staked as ours. For example, this is my notebook. It is something that I own. I don't share it. It doesn't belong to other people. It is just mine. And something that I might have laid claim to is maybe my favorite chair in a communal workspace. Right? I don't own it, and someone might come in to the workspace, and since it's not assigned to me, they might sit in that, and I might have some feelings come up about it, and thinking about, is this a boundary that I want to maintain something rigid, or do I want to be flexible in how I navigate this interaction? Time boundaries, these are boundaries regarding one of our most finite resources, which is how we spend our minutes, hours, and days. So why even set boundaries? So clear boundaries can lead to clarity in roles. And what I mean by that is, if we think about some of the roles that we have throughout the world, we have multiple hats that we wear, multiple roles that we play. And some of those roles that we play have set boundaries that we have, as a society, decided that these are appropriate and that we will all have a social norm around them. So if we think about the employer versus employee, right? There are boundaries that an employer might say or do things towards the employee that the employee wouldn't turn around and do back to the employer. There are roles and boundaries in between navigating a parent relationship versus a child, friends versus someone that you're in a significant relationship with, right? So there are different roles, and those boundaries, they are not always rigid, but those roles do come with some prescribed boundaries that we have set. It can lead to, setting clear boundaries leads to self-care. So we're protecting our emotional and mental health by setting boundaries. It leads to respect. I'm respecting myself by setting boundaries, and I'm respecting others by adhering to their own boundaries. My needs will get met. My physical and emotional safety, increased work-life balance, and healthy relationships. And this quote that I'm sharing is from Brene Brown. She is a social worker, and she has a couple TED Talks and a podcast. And she says, daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves even when we risk disappointing others. So how to set boundaries? Before we even consider verbalizing our boundaries to others, thinking about in what areas in my life am I trying to draw these boundaries? So asking myself these questions: what brings me energy? What exhausts me? What brings me joy? What creates resentment? I might be somebody who is extroverted, and what brings me energy is saying yes to a lot of social engagements because I get energized from social interactions. If I am an introvert, rather, it might bring me exhaustion to accept social engagement. So I can set boundaries by declining and saying no thank you to other social obligations. What brings me joy and what creates resentment? Be direct. Verbalize boundaries. Often what I see is that we might anticipate that others should know, especially if they're a loved one or a friend, they should know what my boundaries are. They should know that I didn't want to do that, or that I didn't have the energy or the time to do those things that they're asking or that they're doing with me. And people are not mind readers, unfortunately. And so we do need to verbalize what our boundaries are. And something to also remember is that no is a complete sentence. And we'll talk about in the next couple of slides ways that we can say no and give a little bit more elaboration as the situation requires. I imagine if we're trying to set boundaries with our employer, that no might, as a complete sentence, might not feel comfortable. And the last thing is to practice, practice, practice. Setting boundaries is challenging. If it was easy, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? And if we've never set boundaries before and we're working on setting boundaries, or if we've set boundaries but we haven't maintained them, then this is going to bring some discomfort and trying to navigate, how do I set these boundaries? How do I maintain them? And how do I sit with any discomfort that might arise from pushback that I'm getting from others? So here's are a few examples of boundary setting. A coworker continues to text about work after hours, and if you've set this boundary and you've let them know, or if this is how you want to set the boundary, you can simply say, hi, I already left work, let's pick this up during work hours. I didn't engage any further. I didn't say, just this one time, let's continue this conversation. If you're wanting to set a rigid boundary that during work, that's when you talk to me. After work, I'm in after work mode and I don't want to engage in work, then setting this boundary that is a little bit more rigid. A friend is discussing their diet or weight loss. If this is something that is a boundary you're wanting to set, you can say something along the lines, I'm working on body neutrality, let's talk about something else. Or, you know, diets come up often in conversation, and you could say something like, oh, we are so much more interesting than simply the foods that we eat. Can we talk about anything else? Someone borrows something without asking. You can set that boundary within the future. Do not use my stuff without permission. Some personal boundary setting. So maybe not in the workplace, or some of these are in the workplace as well. A friend is wanting emotional support and you do not have the energy. Often we want to be there to support our friends, and we might be going through something on our own that we need support on, or we might have had a hard day. We might just be exhausted emotionally, physically, and we are not able to hold space for them, either at that time, or maybe it's a topic that is really challenging for you to sit with and you are unable to hold space for them. You can say something along the lines, I would like to support you, and right now I do not have the energy to give you my attention. And if you are going to a friend and you're wanting support, a way that you can see what their boundaries are or respect their boundaries is asking them if they have the energy, the emotional energy to support you through a conversation right at this time, and see if they have a boundary that they need to set with you. A friend or coworker is often late. This is that time boundary that we talked about, our finite resource, letting them know if you are going to be, asking them if you're going to be late, let me know. Someone makes an inappropriate comment, and you can respond with, I don't find comments like that funny or appropriate. So this is a skill that comes from dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, and it is a way that we can get our needs met in a more effective way. Doesn't guarantee that our needs will get met, doesn't guarantee that the boundaries will be respected. It is just giving us a little bit of a boost and making it slightly more likely that we will. And this is something, again, to use after we've already established and verbalized that boundary. So say we've set the boundary before and we are trying to maintain that boundary by using Dear Man. So D, you're going to describe the event without using opinion. So we're going to be black and white in how we share the event. We are going to express how that made you feel. It felt blank when blank. We are going to assert, so tell the person what you would like what you would like done in the future. You're going to reinforce, give positive or negative consequences as a result. And then the next three letters are how we are going to appear. So we want to be mindful. So we want to stay on one topic. Sometimes when we're having conversations with others and we're bringing up something that we might have some dissatisfaction in, the other person might also bring up some things that they would like addressed, which is something to focus on afterwards. And you can say, I hear what you're saying, and I'd love to give your conversation more time. Can we finish talking about what I brought to the table, and then we can address yours either later or set another date for you to talk about that. The appear confident, we want to stand up straight and be able to project our voices. We want to make eye contact. We don't want to appear closed off or curled into ourselves. And negotiate. Negotiate, if it doesn't feel appropriate, then you can ask for them to help collaborate on a solution. And then negotiate is just trying to find a middle ground. So to give an example of a boundary that you can try setting or reinforcing with a Dear Man is, say that you have a partner that you are living with or a roommate, and you are constantly having to do the dishes that they have done, and you've already asked them to, can you please do the dishes? Or maybe you even have a chores that you've already agreed upon that you will do, and they're not doing their part. So describe the event without using any opinions. So last night, it was your turn to do the dishes, and the dishes are sitting in the sink. It makes me feel not respected when you are unable to fulfill the obligations that we had agreed upon. In the future, so telling them what I would like done, in the future, I would like for you to do the dishes like we had just agreed upon. Reinforce, so give positive or negative consequences as a result. So a positive consequence is I would feel more respected in our relationship, and I would feel closer. I would feel closer in this relationship. And if you wanted to go, say you've already done a Dear Man before and you gave the positive, still happening, the negative consequence as a result could be, if you're unable to do this, then I am going to have to look at other housing options. If it's a roommate or if it's a partnership, I'm going to have to consider other options. Mindfully, so stay on topic. If they come and say, well, you haven't been taking out the trash, I hear what you're saying, and I'd love to set some time aside for us to discuss your concerns. Right now, I'd appreciate if we could stay on what I'm bringing to the table. And then negotiate. If you're unable to do the dishes that same night, I'd appreciate if you could have them done before noon. Or if you're not wanting to negotiate, asking them to collaborate on a solution. So I would like for you to get the dishes done that night. How do you see this happening? Is there anything that you can suggest as a solution? So giving it back to them to also help them come up so it's not just on you. So common work boundary issues. Working overtime. Working overtime can be great if you're getting overtime and if you're trying to get a project done. And if we continue to work overtime, then we are running the risk of having burnout and some resentment. So being able to take rest and self-care to prevent burnout and will promote more effective and efficient work results. So maybe that boundary looks like talking to your supervisor or your boss and asking to delegate work or have another person on the team join you, or giving longer deadlines, whatever that might look like for your situation. Working on weekends or after hours. So if you are in a position where you are not working on weekends, or regardless, working after hours, being able to turn off your email notifications if that's a boundary you've already set. Not responding after hours if you have already set that boundary. Using PTO so that, again, we don't burn out and we're able to be more effective workers and even just more effective in our lives. Turning down tasks that are not in your job description, so not overexerting yourself and not going out into other domains that you were not hired to do. If you are trying to navigate platonic relationships with coworkers, and that's not something you're interested in, or if you're just trying to keep them platonic, being able to set boundaries. And for romantic relationships, depending on where you work, your employers might already set that boundary for you. And if they haven't, you are able to set that boundary for yourself. Setting a work-life balance. Expecting immediate responses. Sometimes coworkers can text you and after hours or even during hours and expect an immediate response. And being able to ask ourselves, is this a crisis or is someone making me feel like it is a crisis? So how to set boundaries at work. So be direct and firm. So we want to move away from inconcise language. So maybe saying, maybe later, I don't think so, some other time, or let me think about it. Other options to use are no, right? It is a full sentence. Thank you, but no. Or I'm not available. If an explanation is necessary, be brief. So you can say, no, I'm not available. No, I'm honored that you thought of me and I'm not pursuing that area of focus. No, I'm not able to take on any new assignments or projects. If it is something that you're wanting to not be so rigid on and you're wanting to be flexible, then you can suggest a check-in time period. So I'm not pursuing the area of focus at this time. Let's schedule a meeting in a month. Or I'm not able to take on any new assignments or projects. Let's check in a few weeks when I've wrapped up these current ones. So that gives you, that's more of a flexible boundary, right? Because at that time, in the later date set, you are able to also say no. And if it's something that is interesting to you and you have the emotional energy to take on, then you're able to do it at that time. And then holding on to your no. If you give in after saying no, this teaches people that they are able to push your boundaries to get their needs met. So that shows them that you have those permeable boundaries, right? And if they are wanting you to do something, say they give you an assignment at the end of the day on a Friday, and you say, no, I'm not available, and they come back and say, oh, come on, it won't take that much time, you'd really be helping me out. And maybe you say, well, I really don't want to, right? We're being more inconcise now, and they might know that if they push a little bit harder that they'll be able to get a yes out of you. And I give that example, and I want to also add that I don't think people are maliciously, for the most part, trying to walk all over our boundaries, push them, or test them. People are trying to get their needs met as well. So if they have found a way that they are able to get their needs met, it makes sense why they might push on it. And you are not beholden to get everyone's needs met, right? You have your own needs that you need to be making sure are met. And so being able to set those boundaries for yourself to protect your mental health. With COVID, it has kind of blurred, not kind of, it has absolutely blurred if you worked from home during the pandemic. And if you're continuing to work from home, or if you've gone back, then these roles of work life and home life were blurred. And so the boundaries have also been blurred. So maybe you didn't take phone calls at your house because you weren't working from home, and now you are answering emails from your bed or taking phone calls, or you are doing laundry in between meetings, right? So that is a more flexible, right? You're not saying, I'm not going to do any home living tasks while I'm at work. That would be a rigid boundary, which you're able to do. And if you want to be more flexible and let your dog out or take a load of laundry out of the washer into the dryer, then those are more flexible boundaries. If you're having a hard time transitioning from work to your relaxing state at home, then being able to physically separate your desk from where you relax at home. So if you're unable to put a barrier of some sort, maybe a curtain, maybe a screen, something that can separate where you spend your time at home from your workstation. If you have another room that you can put it in, or if you're unable to do that, being able to close your computer if you have a laptop, or turn off your screen so that you're not seeing active screens as you walk around your house. And then creating an end of day ritual that will signal that the workday has ended. That might look like listening to a meditation on the commute home. That might be engaging in movement after work, so going to the gym, maybe going on a walk with family or your dog, changing out of your work clothes, maybe it's washing your face, something that you do over and over and over again, so a ritual, right? That allows your brain and your body to recognize that this is the end of the day. I am now transitioning into a different role in my life. So boundaries are self-care. We talked about that a little bit earlier in the presentation, that boundaries are often an overlooked form of self-care. So boundaries allow us to protect our energy and our mental health. If someone is upset when you're establishing a new boundary or upholding a previously permeable boundary, they somehow benefited from you not holding that boundary. Like I mentioned earlier, they were getting their needs met by you not holding that boundary. Common personal boundary issues: commenting on weight or appearance, going through texts or personal belongings, showing up late repeatedly venting or dumping on you, setting a work-life balance, physical touch boundaries, expecting immediate responses, and family. Family can be challenging for many reasons. And with setting boundaries, our families tend to know what we are going to push back or what we're not going to give any pushback on, and they're able to push a little bit further than maybe a friend would be able to, or a coworker, and certainly a stranger would be able to. And depending on the family that you were raised in, there's also cultural influences at play that your family might not have firm boundaries. They might not have grown up in a living situation that had firm boundaries, or they might not understand when you try to set boundaries. And so that, I say that to be mindful of your family's experience and to give yourself grace and them as you try to navigate setting boundaries. And commenting on weight and appearance, I have that on there. A lot of the clients that I work with are working towards eating disorder recovery. And so commenting on anyone's weight and appearance is something that you don't know what you're commenting on. You could be complimenting weight loss, and that could be for cancer, that could be for another medical issue, it could be for an eating disorder, it could be a breakup, it could be multiple things. And commenting if somebody's body has fluctuated on the other end is also a boundary that you can set, that you don't want people commenting on your body. Another meme, I told you I love memes. So if you can't handle me at my worst, you probably have healthy boundaries, right? So being able to set boundaries with friends if they are doing that emotional dumping on you, if they are showing up late repeatedly, being able to set those boundaries that this is my limit and I'm not going to engage in a relationship in this manner. Often, some pushback I get is, how can I set boundaries without being aggressive, without being perceived as being rude, or without being mean? And there is a difference between being aggressive and being assertive. So being aggressive, that will create fear in the person we're being aggressive towards. Being assertive is informing, and it is informing to the person we're speaking to, and it creates attention to what we're trying to address. Aggression is intended to silence, and it represses feelings. Assertiveness is intended to communicate and acknowledges emotions. Aggression is intended to cause harm and violates boundaries. And being assertive communicates directly and standing up for yourself without violating the boundaries of others. So if we think about boundaries as bubbles, we want to be able to have our boundaries and have them push up against others, but not burst other people's boundaries, right? So aggression is bursting those boundary bubbles, and being assertive is being able to be next to each other, share a boundary, and being okay in this setting. And so some takeaways are: setting boundaries are not selfish. Setting boundaries is self-care. Verbalize your boundaries, right? People are not mind readers, so making sure that we have verbalized it and given them the opportunity to respect our boundaries. If they are a friend or a loved one, it's likely that they are not wanting to cause you harm, and they're not wanting to disrespect your boundaries. It's more likely that they are having an ineffective experience where they don't know how to get their needs met effectively, and they are trying to navigate getting their needs met, and it is pushing up against yours. And again, that you are not responsible for that, but being able to verbalize your boundaries so it gives them the opportunity to correct and repair what they have done, or it gives you the opportunity to, after setting these boundaries, determine for yourself if this is a relationship that you're wanting to maintain or if it's something that you need to step back from. And then being able to maintain your boundaries. So again, considering, are these the boundaries that I'm wanting to set in my life? Do I want them to be rigid, right? There is nothing wrong with having rigid boundaries, as I shared with you with consent, and having flexible boundaries, right? So do I want these boundaries to be flexible and permeable? We try to go towards the middle path, so being flexible. And again, there's nothing wrong with having those rigid boundaries. And I hope that I was able to give you a little bit more information on boundary setting and how to set boundaries in a personal setting and in a work-life setting, and how it is a form of self-care, and that it is to protect your energy, and boundaries are putting limits on the energy that you are giving out to others. And again, my name is Nikki Dubois, and if you have any questions or need additional resources, my email is nikki.dubois@ercpathlight.com. Thank you.